So today I am so delighted to have Ashley Avis here. She has a new film called Wild Beauty, Mustang Spirit of the West, and it's going to be coming out next month. And it has been winning all these wonderful awards at film festivals all over. And she also has a fantastic foundation called the Wild Beauty Foundation, where she is trying to get the word out to help save our wild horses. And so I am just delighted to have her here and wanted to talk to her about her film and how getting the word out like this makes a difference for our wild horses. So thank you for coming, Ashley.
Thank you for having me, Carol, and for your friendship and your advocacy over the years that we've gotten to know each other.
Thanks. So tell our listeners a little bit about your film, like how you got started, why you wanted to do this film.
So I grew up with horses. They were a big part of my life as a child, as a young person, and I fell in love with the world of horses thanks to Anna Sewell's Black Beauty and reading great equine-themed novels as a child. Walter Farley's The Black Stallion. Those books really painted such a vivid portrait of what I wanted my childhood to be, which was amongst and so it was a beautiful introduction into that world. And then when I went to college in New York City, horses fell out of my life for over a decade. And so as I was starting my career as a filmmaker with various independent films and doing commercials and just developing what you need to do as a filmmaker and a voice and a style, eventually fate stepped in and horses came back to my life when I took a serendipitous meeting with a producer that ended up producing Black Beauty. And I'll never forget, he said, what inspired you to become a filmmaker? And this was in 2017. And I mentioned the scene on the beach with the Black Stallion and that mystical connection that we have with horses, and how that scene between Alec and the Black was wordless, and it was just about communication. And of course, it was sweepingly beautiful. And he said, my partner and I have wanted to remake Black Beauty for 10 years. If you have a take, let me know. And so I immediately went home and I put together I think it was 10 days, I put together a 40-page pitch, and the movie went really fast. But what was really interesting and how this ties to our documentary is that my task was to modernize Black Beauty for audiences of today. And obviously, so many of us grew up with that novel. It is beloved worldwide. And it was really important to me to figure out what the modern day parallel was going to be for Black Beauty. And so in realizing that Anna Sewell wrote Black Beauty as an animal welfare plea for the horses of her time, the cab horses, I started looking into modern day issues that horses were facing now. How could we authentically use a platform like a film like that to reach people and to honor why she wrote this timeless classic in the first place? And that's what led me to Wild Horses. And so ahead of Black Beauty, my husband and producing partner, Ed, and I, we raised a little bit of money to be able to take a small crew out into the wild to film real wild horses. And we went to Utah, we went to Anaheim, we went to White Mountain in Wyoming, and then we filmed the Triple B Roundup in 2019 in Nevada. And seeing it was such a polarizing experience emotionally, that first trip into the wild. I had never seen wild horses before, and to experience their beauty and the families, and you spend a few hours with them and you really observe. And as you extremely well know, it's just the peace that they bring you, and how you can really see the beauty of those family dynamics. That was so stunning and so impactful. And then we went to a roundup, and it was the first one we had ever seen. And I had seen videos, I had seen photos, as many of us have. There was nothing like going to a roundup and seeing those helicopters. There were two choppers driving those horses so low, as they often do. And I had never felt that level of anger in that way, and that level of injustice in that way, as to when we were sitting on top of that mountain, told we couldn't even put up umbrellas because it would scare the horses when you've got these massive choppers chasing them at eye level. It just was so bonkers absurd. And and so that day we realized, if Black Beauty does well, and that was before Disney stepped in, if that film does well, we're going to have a platform to keep going. And if we can, we need to use that platform. It was, it has felt like a calling, because we've put the documentary together over 5 years. and it's been hard. You know, we've stepped away from certain people that have wanted to help the film get off the ground, but put restrictions on it. There were a number of different ways we could have made this movie, but we decided to keep it very pure, very journalistically driven, and we cobbled it together over the course of those years. But the film in the documentary, the story in the documentary, really found itself, and the heart of the film evolved over the years. Because initially we thought we were going to do an indie Planet Earth with a celebrity narrator talking about wild horses and the issues and the beauty. But then as we got deeper into it, we got bolder, and I started asking those harder questions of the Bureau of Land Management, and it became this interesting merger of a cinematically stunning look at wild horses and their families, and then a journalistic expose into the corruption that's happening to them. And we, as you've seen the film, we haven't held back. So I'm excited for the world to see what's going on.
Yes, and I think, there have been any number of films made about wild horses, but the way that you're tying together the beauty of it and the horror of it together, I have not seen anybody do that as successfully as your film does.
Thank you.
And I think that's integral to it, because you want people to care, but you
Yeah.
don't want them to be so horrified that they can't deal with it. So it's quite a balancing act. And
Yeah.
I think that's so important.
I agree. And that's something we talked about from the very, very beginning. And it was a conversation with the producers of Black Beauty as well, because that film has now been seen by tens of millions of accounts on Disney Plus. And so while that's a narrative story and a fictionalized story, that's still all wild horse centric. The first 20 minutes of that movie are about Beauty's loss of family. And we needed to strike a balancing act in that project as well. And I'll never forget referencing the Lion King and how much children can handle if something is done properly and visualized properly. So in Black Beauty, for example, the roundup is in slow motion and it's really sad. But that and Disney was so amazing in being supportive of. There were no creative changes that occurred to temper what's in that film, and we thought that was a really interesting, not a benchmark for the documentary, but we absolutely discussed in Wild Beauty, while the documentary is not made for children, we really wanted the 12 or 14-year-old young advocate to be able to see the film and want to raise their voices. And also just the empathetic adult. I mean, I've seen some of the previews of certain slaughter documentaries, and just going into that level of ghastly, I think a lot of people, child or adult, just simply can't handle. And then you're shutting it off, and then you're not getting the message, and you're not
Right.
posting about it. Because so I think we've ended up striking a very good balance where most ages can watch the film. Most of the screenings we've done on the film festival circuit, people come out of the theater crying, but that's good. Or they're angry and they're impassioned. And that's
Right.
been such a fantastic response, because people actually want to know, what do I do? I didn't know this was happening. What can I do to stop this? Because it's unjust and it's cruel and it's wrong.
Well, and I think the visual format has become more and more and more important these days. And
Yeah,
so to be able to bring a message to people in a medium that they relate to is
yeah.
going to have much more of an impact.
I agree. And what we said at the beginning as well, because I directed a documentary years ago, but it was not one of my, I was brought aboard to direct it versus we produced this. I mean, we did all of the, we were all of that. And in just, well, I lost my train of thought for a moment. What were you just saying,
Oh,
Carol?
about the visual impact,
About the
the
visual,
visual
just as
medium.
yeah,
Yeah.
in being narrative storytellers and that being our background versus documentary filmmakers, we really wanted to bring that sensibility to the documentary, because in a narrative film, if you care about the lead character or their best friend or their parents or somebody in the film, you care about what their journey is and what their
Yes.
quest is. And so we really, that's what we wanted to do at the beginning of the documentary process, but we weren't sure which horses or which families were going to become those heroes or those special horses that you really link into. And what really evolved was, I mean, the heart of the film is really Anarchy, and then a big chunk of it is also San Juan Basin. Those are really the two main herds that we focus on. But at Anarchy, because that's where we did a lot of filming over the years and kept going back and getting to know those families, that that roundup in 2021 was, I mean, I think it was just being a filmmaker and knowing we needed to do our jobs on behalf of the horses allowed us to get through that roundup, because I'll cry at a Zales commercial. I mean, we were able to be strong during that roundup, and that narrative arc for the Anarchy and the fact that that did happen. What I've said is I want that loss to not be in vain, because
Right.
that people really are emotionally impacted when they see that at the end of the film, and that being the herd that we talk about from the beginning. If we can't protect them, we have to start somewhere. We need to. So, but
Yes,
it was
it's horrendous being at a
it
roundup.
was yeah,
There, also the feeling of helplessness, that
yeah,
there's nothing you can do to stop it. There's nothing you can do to help the horses. It's 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 horrendous. It's really truly the worst thing. And you're right. Knowing that you're there for the horses, to help the horses, it's really the only thing that keeps me going when I go to a roundup.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, what are you seeing for wild horses for the future? What are you wanting to have happen at this point, given where we are right now, which is pretty grim where we are right now, actually?
It is pretty grim, but hopefully the direction to look is up when you're at the bottom. I mean, we have to, or else they don't have anybody. And I know a lot of people are disheartened, but what I do see and what I'm very encouraged by is what we noticed at the very beginning of this journey. As a horse person, I didn't know that this was happening. I didn't, and I felt I've used this before I felt such a sense of guilt when I found out this was happening, and that I grew up with horses and I didn't know what was going on in the American West. And if you're a horse person, regardless of breed, I feel like if you love horses, you connect with wild horses and you want to do something about this. So for us, our skill set lies in the visual medium. And I also love working with children, and I love speaking to kids and the younger generation. I do a lot with mentorship in film, and then in this space now too. So our great hope is that after 5 years of making this documentary, that it comes out with a big splash, and it just wakes people up that don't know about this, because we have an extraordinary community of passion, but we need to break through that knowledge base and reach, I've said from the beginning, not just a national audience, but an international audience, because there's such a romance for Europeans, for example, about the American
Oh,
West and
yes.
wild horses, and there's such an interest. And when they find out about this, they think, "What? How are you doing this? You're not one of the most beautiful parts of the American West. How could you?" There's such a When we talk to people that are not Americans, there's usually an uproar and just almost a disbelief. And so my great hope is that we're able to get the film and ultimately the message and a call to action to a really wide audience during a finite period of time when our documentary will have the most power, which will be this year during the release in particular, and then late this year as we campaign on the award circuit. So I think if more people know what's going on, and we're flooding the lines from members of Congress, and we've got kids writing to their lawmakers, and just if we create a flood, and I don't think there's really been a flood yet, not in this way, not in the
No,
way the Cove or Blackfish broke out. And those are two massively successful movies. But look what they did for their respective species.
right,
If we can
right.
do that for wild horses, and I also think for us, trying to trigger the celebrity community, if people have big followings and they have a platform and they believe in something, use it. And so
Yes.
we've been very fortunate that that some of the actors from Black Beauty, some of the stars of Heartland, they've started speaking out for this, and just
Wonderful.
it's awareness.
Right.
People don't know how are they gonna why they'll never make that call to their member of Congress or send that email or have their child write a postcard.
Yeah, and it's been so difficult because we had so much hope for our new Secretary of the Interior coming in that we would be able to make some changes in the Bureau of Land Management and how they managed wild horses. And her turning a deaf ear to the entire issue has just put people on their ears. I mean, it's been really, really tough. And so I think public awareness and pressure is going to
Yeah,
be what makes a difference in changing the way the Bureau of Land Management manages our wild horses
yeah,
because the path that they're going down right now is extinction. There's no
yeah,
question. They want to remove as many horses as possible from our public lands. And these herds, once they are sterile and not breeding or so small that there's no genetic diversity, there's no
yeah,
coming back from that. There
yeah,
isn't.
yeah. And it's heartbreaking that some of the herds that we visited, like the Pokegama, and just some of these herds that have either been zeroed out or really reduced. It's just it's really heartbreaking. And I agree with you. It does very much feel like in some of these, the slow reduction of them feels like a plan toward if either we're going to wipe them out or they're going to wipe themselves out. And that's just and the misinformation campaign is just striking. I think that's definitely worth mentioning. I mean, over the years of going to roundups and dealing with the Bureau of Land Management, and I don't want to say a blanket statement that every single person in the agency is bad.
Of course.
But that's usually we encounter some resistance when we show up with the film equipment we do. Um, but uh, but it definitely feels like, when you go to a roundup and the one reporter from the local news station gets peeled off by the publicist to go talk 100 yards away, and you know that they're telling them what the BLM wants them to print. It just the repetitive nature of some of the talking points, it just feels like I'm talking to an actor almost, or a good publicist. I mean, some of their publicists are quite good at their jobs, which is disturbing at times. But I think, and I've had some great conversations with a journalist named Vickery Eckhoff, who she's done a lot of great research and data mining of the misinformation and the repeated news cycle of the blanket statements. We know they're starving, they're overpopulated, there's drought. I mean, and then you go out to a place like San Wash Basin when we found that roundup and the water holes were full and the horses were healthy. And it's just, so I think what we're really striving to do too with the film, people come out of those theaters in an uproar at what we captured with the BLM and again, and the conversation. They're angry and it's so, I mean, we, if this was a narrative movie, we wouldn't need to script it. I mean, it's just, we captured what we captured and we show the truth, and people know that there's, excuse my language, but just so much bullshit that is purported about the state of wild horses in our country by the agency. So that's what I'm hoping to eliminate too, to try to help debunk some of those myths and some of that
Right.
misinformation.
Right. That narrative has been going on for such a long time.
Yeah,
And it's shocking to me when I post pictures of horses and they're like, they're fat. How are they
yeah,
fat? I thought they were starving to death. I thought there was a drought. I thought they were all dying. And I'm like, no, they're not. They really aren't.
yeah.
But being able to fight fire with fire in a way is you're coming out with this film and showing this to a big audience and being able to have another narrative. I think that's very, very powerful.
I agree. And hopefully we're also going to be reaching, if people have, if some people who don't know about the issue have read an article about, but it's cursory and they have maybe know a little bit about wild
Right.
horses. Hopefully the film also helps get ahead of the people that haven't been tarnished by that, and can start them off in an honest, authentic, fresh, journalistic way of looking at this in the right way. Hopefully we can start searing our own narrative to a fresh audience too.
Right. And then I think that kind of leads right into, why did you set up your foundation?
So it started with some rescues. So when we when we documented our first roundup, and I felt the emotions I told you about it. It was I saw this little colt get pushed into the trap site by the chopper, just all by himself. He maybe a month old. Then I turned to my husband and I said, if we can find him, I'd like to do something about him. And we found him, and he was reunited with his mother, and we adopted both of them. And that just started this. The small bonus I got for Black Beauty when it came out went straight to adopting 13 horses at one time. And I'll never forget, after my husband and I did it, and they were wild horses and also domestic horses. And we made this decision. We were going to rescue one. It was one wild mare that we found, and we rescued all 13. And my husband woke up in the morning. He turns over. He goes, "Ashley, what did we do?" And but it was such a beautiful way into, and it was a lot. I mean, and we found homes for all of those horses, and really wonderful homes. And it's kicked off the beginnings of why we wanted to start our foundation. And then, as things do, it began evolving into, how do we help the overall community with our skill set, and what unique things can we bring to the table. And there are big organizations, there are smaller. We're definitely very small. It's basically my husband and I and my brother and an intern. But we can use our creative voices to do unique things, with knowing some wonderful actors, for example, that want to help bring the wild world and wild horses to children. So we launched a short story competition, and we've got these wonderful people that also have big followings that are reposting these videos of kids telling stories about wild horses. And that's a very creative, very positive way to keep getting the message out to
Yes.
people. And so that's where I think we fill in well, because I love talking to children. I think that's a specific skill set, and our kids are the ones that are going to be our future stewards. So let's start informing them in the right way, and
And you
then just
and you have
yeah.
that wonderful newsletter too that you've been doing.
Thank
So
you. Yeah,
getting the word out about when there needs to be take action on
yeah,
something that's coming up, and getting the word out to people.
exactly. And we've been working on an educational program slowly for about a year, that we're calling Wild Horse Week. That it looks like we're going to launch. We're going to do a soft pilot launch in June. We're working on doing a screening of the documentary for Congress in early June, and
Awesome.
then yeah, so I'm very excited about that. And then surrounding some of that energy, we're going to do a pilot launch of the curriculum for Wild Horse Week. So whether it's a school or your brownie troop or your church group or your family over, the course of a week, it's free downloadable content that has been developed by some really wonderful experts, including Eric Mulvar, Dr. Yvette Running Horse Collin, who's doing some amazing research into the wild horse, and did the wild horse ever go extinct? She's phenomenal. A number of lovely people have collaborated on the curriculum for kids, which is aimed at middle grade, but which is, I think, a really good medium where a parent or a teacher could adapt it a little bit for younger kids, or adapt it a little for older children. And it's a 5-day long week of curriculum where kids learn about how horses helped us build our world, obviously the origins of horses and how they evolved, horses in history, wild horses are a big focus, and then how horses are still relevant and powerful today. And through therapy and through all these wonderful things, we can't forget horses. And in to culminate Wild Horse Week, it's a call to action for children who want to participate, where they write a letter to their lawmakers. We're going to have downloadable postcards, and they make a pledge on behalf of the wild world. So that's something I've been conceiving for a couple of years that I think would be amazing. And hopefully, as we grow as an organization, we can build that out and reach even more kids, because that's a program like that is a forever thing. Horses hopefully will always be with us, and that's part of
Yes.
the whole conversation and everything we need to protect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can't imagine a world where we don't have wild horses on our public lands. I just can't imagine it. They enrich our lives so much, and the landscape and the states where they are, and um I can't imagine it. And so I think any efforts to bring awareness and bring people out there, I'm always telling people, get out there, go see
Yeah.
those horses while you can. Get out, because
Yeah.
there's nothing like it. I mean, you grew up with horses. Being around wild horses is nothing like being with a group of domestic horses that have been brought up, in people's backyards. There's nothing like it.
Yeah. It was, especially in 2021 where we did a great deal of filming. And with COVID, I mean, so our real jobs are as, filmmakers. And when you're on a film, usually you're out of the country or you're out of your house for months on end. And what was a very fortunate byproduct of having more time was that we took a few trips that were over a month into the wild. And it was so interesting and such a gift to be out there that long and to be on the road. And you go into a major city after 2 weeks in the wild, and it's almost startling. But it spending that much time out there with them, it our whole crew felt it. It was the tonic of wildness that Thoreau talks about. It really, really is. And it was a sense of euphoria and freedom, just being out there with those huge skies and those incredible sunsets with silhouetted wild horses. And as you do, you spend enough time with them and you get to see those extraordinary interactions, or the stallions fighting for mares, or the families, or it just, I completely agree. There's nothing like being out there and letting your senses get completely taken over in every respect, just being in the wild with them.
And then you have the shock of the contrast with the roundup, with the holding facilities, where,
Yeah.
you know, all the light has gone out of their eyes when they're
Yeah.
in these holding facilities. They're just resigned and living in pens for the rest of their lives. It's so wrong. There's nothing more wrong than that.
It was so disturbing after Aniki, because that became the heart of the documentary, some of those individual horses, and to see them reduced to what they were after filming them in the wild for that long. And then when you talk about the light going out of their eyes, it's just, I don't even know. I don't have a word for, there isn't a word that encapsulates all the myriad of emotions and the devastation and the sadness and the loss of family and the lack of hope, and they're meant to move and run. And I think that's one of the most well, there are many disturbing things, but some of those holding facilities just, the BLM, if you adopt a wild horse, you have to have certain things on your own facility, including shelter.
Right.
And some of the holding facilities don't even adhere to the standards of adoption, which is
Almost all of
insane.
them. Almost all of them.
Insane. How in the world are those horses supposed to live in these facilities when they can't even get shelter from the elements? Or they're walking through, I mean, the Delta holding facility, and we show this in the film, those conditions, I mean, that place, I don't know how in the world that place is not shut down for just what the images we captured of how they're treating those horses and the
Right.
injuries and the rot of the hook. I mean, those horses were walking through mud and water and muck that was, I mean, up their legs. And there's what bothers me so much is how the BLM, how there isn't even a slap on the wrist for what it just seems like there's just every eyeball is turned away from this. So
Right.
that's why, that's also why I'm excited for people to see the beauty as well as those horrors in the film.
Yes. Yes. And, the Aniki horses were very lucky because there were a lot of people who took them.
Yeah.
And that's not the case for most of the horses.
Oh, yeah.
The
Yeah.
Sandwash horses and the Aniki horses are quite famous. So, the adoption level is very high. But these other herds that people aren't as familiar with, these horses are just doomed to live out their lives this way.
Yeah.
And I can't stand it. You know, when you have over 60,000 horses in these holding facilities. And we're expecting this year to have more horses in holding than we do in the wild. And that's going to be a very, very sad um, landmark when that happens.
Yeah,
So I'm really hoping that we can get something changed through Congress, through outcry, through people's support for the horses. And I I so admire how hopeful you are, and I I think it's important to be in that place instead of being in a well of despair and just give up on it. So, yeah, I think that's so important because when there's an opportunity, we'll take it, right? We'll do everything we can, and so we need partners to help us get the word out.
and that's something we've talked a lot about over the years of getting to know the advocacy space, and just I think teamwork is really important. Not everybody's always going to agree on certain things or
No.
certain outlooks, and that's okay. That's fine. That's human. That's life. But I feel like if we're all in this for the horses, that teamwork should be explored. People, organizations should support each other in the ways that they can. And I think, you know, a lot of us have talked about this. We have such a passionate and insanely passionate pool of wild horse advocates, and we need to come together for something and raise our voices for something. So I'm, you know, of course, I'm really hoping that as many people that care about wild horses help with this surge of awareness that we're confident that we're going to incite with the film coming out. But I think, yeah, but we need more voices, and
We
we
need
need more people to join this fight.
more voices, more ideas. You know,
Yeah,
everybody has their own area of expertise, their own thing. And who knows who might see the film, who's completely unrelated to any advocates and be able to really make a difference. So,
absolutely.
yeah,
And it's been interesting, even with, you know, with the kind of the softer launch at film festivals. Some of the screenings are completely full, and then others might be in smaller venues, or they're in the morning, and you don't have a full theater. But I'm always really, and we've gone to as many as we can. I've always maintained that if you've got one interesting person that we went to one screening and there were only 5 people in the audience because there was a blizzard that happened in Mammoth and nobody could get there. We almost couldn't get there because our car was sliding all over the road, but we still got there. And somebody in the audience of 5, we had a lively discussion afterward, and he knew a member of Congress, and he said, and he had run himself, and he said, "Let me see who I can." You never know who
yes,
could make that call and get the issue in front of somebody new. And so that's another call to action for people that once the film comes out, if you know a journalist or some, just keep spreading it. And if we can use our collective voices to keep that ripple effect going, surely we're going to make some change. And I think that if and I've fallen into despair with this issue too. I mean, the process of editing the project and watching those roundups over and over and over in a small dark room for 4 months. I mean, I did fall into a state of depression. I felt like I was down a well trying to edit the film and watching all of that. And I'm very fortunate to have a very, very supportive partner in life that helped me through it. But I mean, I feel like we all, the one, and you've been in this fight so much longer than I have, but I think that despair is also, as long as we're able to climb out of that mire, it also drives us because we care. And if there are, whether there are 60,000 left or there are 10, we have to keep fighting for them. We have to keep fighting for them.
yeah. Well, so tell our audience
Audience,
when
with
when the film is going to be premiering.
So it is officially premiering on May 12th. It'll be available for pre-order on iTunes and Apple. So if you want to see
Great.
the film, that pre-order period is really important, because if we get enough pre-orders, iTunes and Apple will promote the film and give it more prominent placement on the platform, which means
Wonderful.
more people will see it. So we need to reach a critical, the minimum is, it's actually a small minimum of about 200 pre-orders just to kick that in. And so that's really what we need to do to get people to just have it be marketed better on those platforms to audiences that might not know about wild horses. And then we are putting together two other events coming up, a private screening in Los Angeles where we're trying to get some wonderful equine loving celebrities to come out and support us. And
Great.
then we're putting together a screening for Congress in June where we're planning to bring in our experts and even on the film festival circuit we've gotten some lovely feedback from a few members of Congress. So we're excited to get the project in front of those eyes as well.
Wonderful. And I'll be putting up on the notes for the podcast a link to your website, to your foundation, and people can get information about when it's coming out and when they can purchase the pre-orders and everything like that.
That's great. And this is, as we've talked about, this is for this project, the most critical time when the film comes out. It has its most power, and we're going to be asking those famous faces and basically everyone who cares about wild horses in May to start posting. Even if you posted it before, please post the trailer with the hashtag I stand with wild horses and tag your members of Congress. Because if that same repetitive trailer keeps popping up, and certain people are tagged, that does influence certain algorithms, and people hopefully will start paying attention and will create that surge of awareness that wild horses so desperately need.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, for being
Thanks,
on
Carol.
my Freedom for Wild Horses podcast. And yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for having me and being so amazing for the horses.